Our lesson today is all about the cell. First, let us discuss the history of cytology. Where did the word cell came from? In the year 1665, a philosopher, Robert Hooke, examined a tree bark with his compound microscope. He noticed that the cork portion of the bark was composed of small hexagonal, six-cornered compartments. He calls these structures as cells. The word cell means small room. Because he is the first person to publicly describe these structures, the credit for this discovery was given to him. Robert Hooke is also known as the father of cytology, also known as the scientific study of the cell. Another important person in the early study of cytology is Antoine van Leeuwenhoek. He is a fabric merchant by profession, meaning a person that sells and buys fabrics. He was an inventor, and he invented a simple but powerful single-lens microscope. It is actually a very powerful magnifying glass. He initially used his microscope as a tool to examine the quality of the threads that made up the fabrics he sells. He is the first person to observe and describe protists, which are simple microscopic organisms, composed of a single cell. He calls them animalcules, meaning small animals. He observed these animalcules to be freely swimming in the water. Thus, he described these animalcules as living things. We now call them today as protists, or simple free-living eukaryotic cells. Examples of the protists he discovered are amoeba, ciliates like paramecium, and flagellates such as euglena. He is also the first person to observe that human blood are composed of cells. He is the first person to describe a blood cell and a sperm cell. He is one of the first to show that human beings and animals are composed of cells. Because of these discoveries, Antoine van Leeuwenhoek is also known as the father of microbiology. Microbiology is the scientific study of microscopic living things, or the study of living organisms so small that you need a microscope in order to see them. What then is a cell? The cell is the most basic structural unit of life that still have all the characteristics and function of a living organism. Just like a brick wall is made up of bricks, so too is living things made up of cells. Most cells are really small. For example, 20 blood cells connected end to end will fit in the width of an average human hair. They are also so small that you need a microscope in order to see them. All living things are either unicellular, meaning composed of only a single cell, or multicellular, composed of many cells. Examples of unicellular organisms are bacteria, amoeba or animal-like protists, algae or plant-like protists, and yeasts or single-celled fungi. Most unicellular organisms are microscopic because they are made up of only one cell, which are usually so small that you need a microscope in order to see them. In unicellular organisms, all the basic biological processes are taken up by one cell. Growth, metabolism, respiration, reproduction, irritability, etc. All the functions necessary for an organism to be alive is accomplished by one cell. Examples of multicellular organisms or organisms composed of many cells are animals, plants, and mushrooms. Most living organisms that we can see with our naked eye are examples of multicellular organisms. For example, us human beings are made up of billions of small individual cells. All the basic biological processes and functions are taken up cooperatively by many cells in the organs and tissues of the living organisms. Now, a simple recap. Robert Hooke discovered and named cells. Antoine van Leeuwenhoek is the first person to describe living cells, and one of the first person to point out that microbes are alive. Cells are the basic building blocks of life, and that all organisms are either unicellular or multicellular.